Let me tell you a story. Once upon a time in the far, far, far past of 1994, Disney is on a resurgence after a 2-decade slump of critical and commercial failures. The brand is beginning to show signs of the strength it will soon gain in the decades to follow, putting out films like The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and The Lion King. But even though the company looked to be on good standings from the outside, there was an internal struggle within the leadership. Our protagonist is Jeffrey Katzenberg, the, at the time, current chairman of Walt Disney Studios, running the position from 1984 to 1994, where our story begins. But before we get there, we have to explain who Katzenberg was in Disney. As chairman, he was the head of the studio. He oversaw all the live action and animated feature films, television productions such as Disney Channel, and was in charge of home media distribution. He quickly began to focus on the company's smaller film studio, Touchstone Pictures, where he attempted to get Disney's box office success back as the studio was on a financial losing streak and was beginning to become a joke to all the other studios. He helped produce films such as Pretty Woman, Good Morning Vietnam, and Dead Poets Society, all which were commercial and critical successes. With his success at Touchstone, Katzenberg's main goal became revitalizing Disney's animated features, which is what the company has always been known for. So under his guidance, the Disney Renaissance began. He even brokered the deal between Disney and Pixar and then greenlit the production on Toy Story. So it sounds like our protagonist is quite efficient at his job and helped bring Disney back from the dead. So where did he go after 1994, and why did he leave? Well, Roy Disney, Walt Disney's nephew, and one of the board of directors at the Walt Disney Company, hired Michael Eisner to help run the company as CEO. Eisner was then the one who appointed Jeffrey Katzenberg as chairman of the studio side of the company. But once Katzenberg began getting too good at his job and supposedly taking too much credit for the company's success, Roy Disney and Michael Eisner grew bitter and confrontations began to fester between the three of them. Everything went to hell when Katzenberg talked to Eisner about being promoted to president of the Walt Disney Company. But that would mean demoting the current president, Frank Wells. So Eisner told Katzenberg no, but that if the position ever became vacant, Katzenberg would be promoted to president. Frank Wells then had an untimely death due to a helicopter crash, sending Disney in disarray. Katzenberg, waiting for the news to step up into the position he was promised, was found angry when Eisner decided to not keep his promise and instead took the position for himself. Roy Disney did not like Katzenberg and told Eisner to not promote him, so the three now had a bitter rivalry. Katzenberg felt betrayed by his friend, who hired him to work for the company to begin with, and then left the Walt Disney Company in 1994 after finishing up his contract. So it is now October 1994, just a few months after his leave from Disney, and Katzenberg was gonna show Disney. Not only was he truly the right pick for president of the company, but that he can make great things without the studio. Great things that can rival them. So he decided to create his own studio, and he knew he needed to get the best of the best to help him run it. So he got two people to help carry this heavy task. He brought in David Geffen, who ran record labels, co-founding Asylum Records and then founding Geffen Records. And the third person Katzenberg decided to hire was none other than the world's most legendary filmmaker, Steven Spielberg. The three decided to make an independently run studio that focused on both live-action films and animated features. They started the company with 3 rules that must be followed in order for all 3 of them to work together. 1. They wouldn't make more than 9 films a year. 2. They would be allowed to work for other studios. And lastly, 3. They had to be home for dinner. With conditions settled, signatures acquired, and financial backing through various sources, the studio known as DreamWorks SKG was founded, with the SKG standing for Spielberg, Katzenberg, and Geffen. They soon went into productions on smaller films, starting with their first 3 features, The Peacemaker, Amistad, and Mouse Hunt. None of these being giant financial or critical successes, but it was the growing pains of a first-time studio. But then things began to look up when the following year they released their first animated features in Ants and the Prince of Egypt, both making money and finding critical acclaim. And the studio released its first blockbuster film with Steven Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan, which had a $70 million budget but made $482 million at the box office, with being nominated for Best Picture as a cherry on top. But things got even better when the following year, that being 1999, they had a 3-year streak where they won Best Picture at the Oscars for American Beauty, Gladiator, and A Beautiful Mind. But what everyone mostly knows DreamWorks for is their animated films. And sure, Ants and Prince of Egypt are decent films, but they are nowhere near the studio's best. Things took a major turn for the studio when in 2001 they put out a 3D animated film based on a children's book with an insane budget of $60 million, which was double the budget of the first Toy Story, which only came out 6 years prior. The film made an outstanding $491 million at the box office. And on top of that, not only got nominated for Best Animated Picture at the Oscars, but actually won against Disney Pixar's Monsters, Inc., which was also nominated. That film was none other than the classic masterpiece, Shrek. Everything was now working out for Jeffrey Katzenberg. Not only did he create his own studio, not only did he find financial and critical success with his projects, but he got to stick it to Disney in front of the whole world when the studio won its Oscar for Shrek. The coming years, the studio began to focus even more on the animated features, putting out Shrek 2, Madagascar, Over the Hedge, Flushed Away, Shrek the Third, Kung Fu Panda, Madagascar Escape to Africa, How to Train Your Dragon, and Megamind. The company was now a powerhouse in animation, and was not only making major financial and critical success, but they were doing what no one thought anyone could do. They were genuinely rivaling Disney. So what happened? Why don't we see as many DreamWorks films? And why have most of them lately felt soulless? It seems like DreamWorks' downfall really started with what made their studio so successful: the Shrek franchise. The first 2 films were undoubtedly blockbuster-sized films, especially the second one, which brought in a whopping $935 million, not only being the highest grossing film of that year, beating out films like The Incredibles, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Hellboy, I, Robot, the SpongeBob SquarePants movie, and Spider-Man fucking 2. Not only did it come close to breaking $1 billion at the box office, it was the highest grossing animated film of all time when it came out. But the series took a dip in quality and box office when Shrek the Third came out. A movie I quite like, actually. Shrek the Third made $813 million at the global box office, which is nothing to look over, especially when most live-action blockbuster films these days can't even make half of that. But the main focus was the critical reception, which was more mixed critically, and seems like most fans of the Shrek franchise have not been too kind to the film over the years. Then Shrek Forever came out, and I remember the amount of hype there was going into this movie based on the premise, that being Shrek making a wish for a day to himself, which of course goes horribly wrong, and he ends up never existing. So now he created a dystopian society. Sounds crazy, but the script was severely underwritten and did not deliver the same amount of witty pop culture jokes the franchise has been famous for, and did not go for the emotions as well. The film made $756 million, which, once again, is great, but a big dip from Shrek 2. And the film was also another heavily mixed reviewed film. At this point, the Shrek mania had seemed to be gone. But then, the final nail in the coffin for the franchise came with 2011's Puss in Boots, a prequel to all the Shrek films, and was clearly a cash grab, trying to force a story for a beloved side character, with a clearly rushed script and rushed animation, because even for 2011, this movie is rough to look at. The film is honestly quite dull, and 8 out of 10 jokes do not land whatsoever, and this film proved that the Shrek franchise was to be laid to rest. when it made $555 million at the box office and then was immediately forgotten about. So were the box office numbers technically great? Yeah, absolutely, but every movie made about $100 million less than the previous, so to studio executives, they find that horrifying, and they pretty much killed the Shrek franchise by rushing the productions of Forever After and Puss in Boots, and then obviously trying to milk the franchise through shorts and straight-to-DVD films, and all the crazy merchandise and the attempted spin-off. The Shrek franchise reminds me of how the Despicable Me franchise has been the past decade, and at some point people just got exhausted with it. And I see this exploitation of the Shrek franchise can be copied and pasted to a lot of their properties, and I feel is the main reason for the studio's downfall. They make a really good film, wait a few years and make a sequel that is even better than the first, then rush to make a third film, all while milking the brand through TV shows and shorts and straight-to-DVD releases, or spin-off films, making the brand less special because it's always in your face, especially in such a lesser form. Not to say that television is a lesser form of media, but they treated their television shows and shorts that way for the most part. As you can see with my examples, Kung Fu Panda, Madagascar, How to Train Your Dragon, The Boss Baby, Trolls, and of course, Shrek, and now most recently, Megamind. The studio began focusing only on franchises and how fast they can expand them into every corner of entertainment in the cheapest way possible. That they ended up devaluing the entire company. So they eventually stopped trying to make new original things, and when they did, it was stuff like Turbo, Home, and The Croods. Those weren't doing them too good, so they shifted focus to IP-driven things like Trolls, Captain Underpants, and Mr. Peabody and Sherman. All soulless cash grabs that treated their child audiences like dumbasses, which is never what DreamWorks was. Their movies were intended for kids, but they didn't treat them as stupid, and they made sure that everyone, no matter the age, can enjoy them. And they pushed more edgy humor into their films, which made them stand out from Disney and made them genuinely unique from what most animated features were doing. And this started being felt by the audience, as their movies began to not make the same type of money as they once did. Kung Fu Panda 1 made $631 million. Kung Fu Panda 3 made $521 million. Madagascar 3 made $746 million. The Penguins of Madagascar, the spin-off, made $266 million. The Boss Baby made $527 million, and the sequel, $146 million. Within the past 5 years, they have put out How to Train Your Dragon, The Hidden World, Abominable, Trolls World Tour, The Croods A New Age, Spirit Untamed, The Boss Baby Back in Business, The Bad Guys, Ruby Gilman, The Teenage Kraken, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, and Trolls Band Together. In the past 5 years, DreamWorks Animation released 10 films, and only 2 of them have made close to what the studio used to make. Those being How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World and Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. And even though their critical reception has been hit or miss, they have kept a decent amount of Oscar nominations, with their last one being in 2023 for Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. And as of right now, in March of 2024, Kung Fu Panda 4's opening weekend is tracking to make half of what the first one made in its opening weekend, 15 years ago. On top of that, I see no hype for this movie. And last week, a straight-to-streaming Megamind sequel and show came out without any of the original cast returning, and people have not taken too kindly to it. So what should they do going forward? And what happened to our protagonist, Jeffrey Katzenberg? Well, the first step DreamWorks should take is going back to making more original content and adding the maturity in not only the humor, but the actual narratives of their story. Then limit their amount of forced shows and spin-offs. Secondly, they should go back to being an independent studio, because them being owned by Universal Pictures has commercialized the hell out of them. And that is why there is a constant push in dumbed down and franchise content. But that leads us back to the man himself, the one who started it all, the betrayed Disney chairman, who started this idea with, well, a dream. The studio in 2004 was split into two separate companies. There was DreamWorks Pictures, which was run by Spielberg to make live-action and mostly adult-driven feature films and television. Then there was DreamWorks Animation, which was run by none other than Katzenberg. In February 2006, DreamWorks Pictures was sold to Viacom, and all distributing would go through Paramount Pictures. DreamWorks Pictures was now not an independently run studio anymore, until in 2008, when their deal with Viacom expired, and DreamWorks Pictures was once again independent under Spielberg, who still owns the company today under Amblin Entertainment. But Katzenberg, he decided to keep DreamWorks Animation as an independent studio from 2004 until 2016, when he sold the company to Universal Pictures for $3.8 billion. And the sad thing is, Universal already owns an animation company, Illumination, which I'm sure you all know of. But that isn't the sad part. It's that Universal has openly admitted that they only bought the DreamWorks brand to exploit their IPs and have the rights to all their films for merchandise and theme park rides. They never really intended to keep the studio around to make more original films. They only wanted to pimp out their characters. Now, what exactly happened to Jeffrey Katzenberg after this deal went through? Well, for starters, he cleared a $420 million estimated check. Then, he stepped down as CEO and was head chairman once again, but for DreamWorks this time, his own studio. Then in January of 2017, he left DreamWorks altogether, and I tried my damn best to figure out exactly why he left, and there isn't a definitive reason. It's a mystery. Some people theorize that his contract with Universal told him he had to step down. Some theorize he didn't like having a boss after 22 years of being in charge. And some people believe he just wanted to take the money and leave the stress of running a studio. But I guess we won't ever know for sure. But the last big business venture Katzenberg attempted was so big, maybe even too big of a task, because in 2018, he began the process of creating his very own streaming service, one that will rival every other streaming service, one that will create something entirely new, something that will be the future of streaming as we know it. And after raising $1.6 billion of money through investors and 2 years of planning, the time was now set for April 6, 2020 to launch the service. And the world waited in awe as the service launched. That service being Quibi. Yeah, do you need a few seconds to remember that? The streaming service that had 10-minute episodes called Quick Bites, and you can watch the shows vertically. It was obviously a giant bust, and the service got shut down on October 21st, 2020, only 6 months after its launch. But not after Jeffrey had everybody listen to Get Back Up Again from the Trolls soundtrack, as he announced that all the company's employees are getting fired. And ever since then, Katzenberg hasn't been a part of entertainment or any business venture since, and only time will tell if he ever will return. So, was our protagonist a man driven by passion to create something new, an innovator, a misunderstood genius? Or was he an ego-driven maniac who wanted to show everybody that he was the best? Was the foundation of his company founded on wanting to tell genuine, profound, unique, and innovating stories? Or was it founded on the bitterness of being left out? The bitterness of not getting what was his, what he felt like was owed to him? And when his studio began to fail, to die, did he sell it off because it did not give him the same sense of importance it once did? I don't know. That's up for you to decide. But the one thing we can take away from this tale as fact is, when art becomes a commercialized machine, it stops having any meaning of importance. It stops breathing life into people. It stops trying to push boundaries. It stops having a vision, and it stops having a soul. And with that, our story concludes. but who lived happily ever after? Yet another question for you to decide.